You dropped it. Which means it's mine. Veronica Choi's voice sliced through the marble foyer like broken glass, her diamond-weighted finger stabbing toward Aya Johnson's chest. The emerald necklace dangled from Veronica's other hand like evidence at a trial. You stole from me, you pathetic little thief. The accusation hung in the gilded air, vicious and final. Before Aya could speak, Veronica's hand shot out, shoving the maid backward. Aya stumbled against the console table, the crash of displaced porcelain echoing through the sudden silence. The gathered household staff, 3 maids, 2 security personnel, the cook, froze in place, witnesses to an execution they couldn't stop. Mrs. Choi, I would never, Aya's voice cracked, but Veronica cut her off with theatrical laughter. Of course you'd say that. They always do. She turned to the head of security. Search her. Everything. Her room, her bags, her uniform pockets. Then came the voice that made even Veronica's cruelty pause. Is this really necessary? Choi Dae-Hyun emerged from his study, his tailored black suit a shadow moving through light. In his hands, a tablet, screen illuminated. Not for emails. Not for business. But Veronica didn't know that. None of them understood they had just accused the one person in this house whom Choi had personally chosen to protect, and they'd done it while every camera in the manor watched. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is absolutely unmissable. The Choi Manor rose above Seoul's Han River like a fortress of glass and stone, its architecture a deliberate blend of traditional Korean elegance and modern intimidation. Inside, crystal chandeliers from Milan cast warm light across marble imported from Carrara, creating an atmosphere where beauty masked danger. Aya Johnson had walked these halls for 3 weeks now, her white-collared uniform pressed to perfection, her movements efficient and nearly invisible. At 28, she'd learned to navigate hostile spaces, to keep her head down, her work flawless, her presence forgettable. This job paid triple what she'd earned at her previous positions, enough to send money home to her mother in Atlanta, enough to finally clear her student debt. She couldn't afford to fail here. The household staff had warned her on day 1, Mrs. Choi doesn't like new people. Especially not. They'd trailed off, but Aya understood. She'd seen Veronica's eyes track her movements with cold assessment, the kind of scrutiny that had nothing to do with work quality. But it was Choi Dae-Hyun who unnerved her most. The manor's owner rarely spoke, his presence felt more than seen, a shadow in doorways, a figure watching from the upper gallery. When he did address the staff, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to raise it. Aya had researched him before accepting the position, billionaire property developer, rumored connections to organizations that didn't appear in business journals, a man whose word was both law and sentence. This particular morning, Aya had been polishing the foyer's ornate mirror when Veronica swept down the grand staircase, her emerald Dior gown flowing behind her like liquid envy. The cleaning crew will arrive in 20 minutes, Veronica announced to no one in particular. I want this entrance immaculate. Then her eyes landed on Aya, and something shifted in her expression. A decision made, a trap set. Within minutes, the household erupted. Veronica's ancestral emerald necklace, a piece worth more than Aya would earn in a lifetime, had vanished from its locked case. And Veronica's perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at the newest, most vulnerable member of the staff. She was the only one in my chambers this morning, Veronica declared, her voice rising with each word. The only one who could have taken it. Aya's throat tightened. She'd been in those chambers, but only to deliver fresh linens, a task that took 90 seconds. She'd touched nothing but the closet shelf. Mrs. Choi, I swear I didn't. Of course you swear. Veronica's smile was razor-thin. They always swear. That's when Choi Dae-Hyun appeared at the study door, silent as smoke, the tablet already in his hands. His eyes, dark, unreadable, calculating, swept across the scene with the precision of a man accustomed to judging life and death. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at Aya. And in that moment, Aya realized something the others had missed. Choi Dae-Hyun was not reacting to this accusation. He was observing it. Testing it. Veronica, emboldened by her husband's presence, stepped closer to Aya, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. You people always think you can take what doesn't belong to you. The words landed like a physical blow, their intent unmistakable. But Aya didn't flinch. She'd survived worse rooms than this. She met Choi's gaze instead, her silence a plea not for mercy, but for truth. And Choi's thumb, almost imperceptibly, moved across the tablet screen. 3 weeks earlier, Aya Johnson had stood at the iron gates of the Choi estate, her single suitcase at her feet, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The manor loomed above her like something out of a Gothic novel, all sharp angles and dark glass, traditional Korean roof tiles meeting brutalist concrete in a marriage that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. The architecture whispered a warning, beauty here came with teeth. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Park, had given her exactly 7 minutes of orientation. Mr. Choi values silence, efficiency, and invisibility. If he notices you, you've already failed. Mrs. Choi values. She'd paused, choosing her words with the care of someone navigating a minefield. Mrs. Choi has exacting standards. Don't give her reason to focus on you. But Veronica Choi had focused on Aya from the first moment, her gaze sharp as surgical steel. Aya had been arranging fresh orchids in the main parlor when Veronica descended the staircase, her silk robe trailing behind her like a claim of ownership over the very air. She'd stopped mid-step, her expression shifting from boredom to something colder. You're the new one. Not a question. An assessment. Yes, ma'am. Aya Johnson. Veronica circled her slowly, the way predators circle prey they're not quite ready to kill. Where did Mrs. Park find you? Through the Lumiere Agency, ma'am. I have 5 years of experience in. I didn't ask for your resume. Veronica's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. I asked where she found you. The emphasis made the question's real meaning clear. Aya had learned long ago that some battles couldn't be won with words. Atlanta originally, ma'am. But I've worked in Seoul for 2 years now. Veronica plucked an orchid from the arrangement, examined it, then let it drop to the marble floor. Do that again. The purple ones should be higher. She walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Aya to retrieve the bruised flower. The days that followed established a pattern. Aya would clean a room to perfection, Veronica would find fault. Aya would prepare the tea service exactly as instructed, Veronica would claim it was wrong. The criticism was never about the work itself, but about Aya's presence in these rooms, touching these objects, breathing this rarefied air. She can't stand that you're good at this, whispered Min Seo, one of the other maids, as they folded linens in the service corridor. Mrs. Choi fires staff the way other people change shoes. But you. She glanced toward the security camera in the corner and lowered her voice further. You do everything perfectly. It makes her crazy. What Min Seo didn't say, but what Aya felt in every cold glance, was that Veronica saw her competence as a personal insult. That a black woman could navigate this gilded cage with grace was an affront to every assumption Veronica held about who belonged in her world. Choi Dae-Hyun remained an enigma. He moved through the manor like a ghost with a schedule, present but untouchable, observed but never observing. Or so Aya thought. She'd feel his presence sometimes, a shift in the air that made the hair on her neck rise. She'd turn, and he'd be there in a doorway or at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable, that ever-present tablet in his hands. He never spoke to her directly. Never acknowledged her existence beyond the most minimal nod. But Aya noticed things others missed, the way his eyes tracked Veronica's cruelty with clinical detachment, the way his jaw tightened when his wife's voice rose in manufactured outrage, the way his thumb would move across the tablet screen whenever conflict erupted in his household. Aya told herself to stay invisible, to do her work and nothing more. She couldn't afford to wonder what Choi Dae-Hyun was thinking, couldn't afford to hope that someone in this house saw the truth. Hope was a luxury for people with options, and she had none. So she polished the marble, arranged the flowers, and prepared for the inevitable moment when Veronica's disdain would evolve from verbal cuts into something sharper. That moment came on a Tuesday morning, with an emerald necklace and an accusation that would shatter the manor's careful silence. The scream came at 9:47 in the morning, shattering the manor's practiced quiet like a hammer through crystal. It's gone. Someone stole it. Veronica's voice carried from the master suite down through the corridors, designed to reach every corner of the house. Within seconds, staff members materialized from their various stations, Min SEO from the kitchen, Young-ho from the gardens, Mrs. Park from her office near the service entrance. Aya had been in the West Wing library, dusting the leather-bound volumes that no one ever read. The urgency in Veronica's tone made her stomach clench, some primitive instinct recognizing the sound of a trap being sprung. By the time she reached the foyer, Veronica had descended the grand staircase in full theatrical glory. Her emerald Dior gown, chosen, Aya would later realize, with deliberate calculation, swirled around her as she paced the marble floor. Her phone was already in her hand, not calling for help but recording, documenting her own performance. My grandmother's necklace, Veronica announced to the assembled staff, her voice trembling with what might have been genuine emotion or practiced craft. The emerald piece that's been in my family for 3 generations. Someone took it from my private chambers. Mrs. Park stepped forward, her face professionally neutral. Ma'am, when did you last see it? This morning. It was in its case at 7 o'clock when I checked before my meditation. Veronica's eyes swept across the gathered staff, lingering on each face before moving to the next. And now, just 2 hours later, it's vanished. The staff exchanged glances. Young-ho's weathered face showed concern. Min Seo's eyes widened with worry. The cook, Mr. Kim, stood with arms crossed, his expression suggesting he'd seen this drama play out before with different props and different victims. Then Veronica's gaze locked onto Aya, and the quality of her distress shifted from general panic to specific accusation. You. The word landed like a verdict. You were in my chambers this morning. Aya's throat went dry. Yes, ma'am. I delivered fresh linens at 8:15, as scheduled. Alone? Yes, ma'am. I placed them in the closet and left immediately. The closet. Veronica seized on this detail like a prosecutor finding blood on a blade. The closet where I keep my jewelry case. I didn't touch anything except the shelf where the linens go, Mrs. Choi. I was there for less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Veronica smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this response. 2 minutes is all it takes, isn't it? To see something beautiful and decide it should be yours? The air in the foyer thickened. Aya felt the weight of a dozen eyes on her, some sympathetic, others calculating their own survival. Min Seo's face showed open distress, but she remained silent. Young-ho looked at the floor. Mrs. Park's professional mask never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes, pity, perhaps, or resignation to an inevitable outcome. Mrs. Choi, Aya said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will, I understand you're upset, but I promise you, I didn't take your necklace. I would never. Of course you'd say that. Veronica moved closer, invading Aya's space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. They always claim innocence, don't they? But you were there. Alone. With access. She turned to address the staff like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Who else had the opportunity? Mr. Kim cleared his throat. Ma'am, with respect, the morning cleaning crew was also. The morning crew has been with us for 7 years. Veronica's voice sharpened. 7 years without a single incident. And then she arrives, a dismissive gesture toward Aya, and suddenly my most precious heirloom disappears. What would you conclude, Mr. Kim? The cook fell silent. Self-preservation, Aya realized, trumped truth in this household. These people had mortgages, families, lives that depended on keeping Veronica Choi's favor. She couldn't blame them for their silence, but she felt it nonetheless, the loneliness of standing accused in a room full of witnesses who would not speak. I want her room searched, Veronica declared. Her bags, her belongings, everything. And I want it done now. Perhaps we should wait for Mr. Choi, Mrs. Park suggested carefully. He should be informed. My husband is busy with more important matters than staff issues. But even as Veronica said it, her eyes flicked toward the study door, a microsecond of uncertainty betraying her absolute certainty. Aya followed that glance and saw what Veronica had missed. The study door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, a figure stood in shadow, perfectly still. Watching. Veronica's voice climbed another octave, filling the foyer with righteous fury. I'm calling the police. This is theft, criminal theft. She'll be arrested, prosecuted, and deported back to wherever she crawled from. The threat hung in the air like a blade suspended by thread. Aya's hands trembled at her sides, but she forced them still. She'd survived poverty, prejudice, and a dozen hostile workplaces, but the word, deported, carried a weight that crushed the air from her lungs. Everything she'd built in Seoul, the apartment, the job, the life she'd scraped together, could vanish with a single phone call. Mrs. Choi, please. Aya hated the pleading note in her voice, but desperation overrode pride. I didn't take your necklace. I swear on everything I have. You have nothing. Veronica's smile was poisonous. That's why you took what was mine. She turned to Mrs. Park. Search her. Strip search if necessary. Check every pocket, every seam of her uniform. Min Seo gasped audibly. Young-ho shifted uncomfortably. Even Mr. Kim's stoic expression cracked slightly at the casual cruelty of the demand. Mrs. Park's face remained professionally blank, but her voice carried the faintest edge. Ma'am, that seems necessary, Veronica interrupted. She stepped directly in front of Aya, so close that Aya could smell her Chanel perfume, could see the satisfied gleam in her eyes. This wasn't about the necklace, Aya realized with sudden, crystalline clarity. This was about power. About reminding everyone in this household exactly where they stood in Veronica Choi's hierarchy. You dropped it somewhere, didn't you? Veronica's finger stabbed toward Aya's chest, close enough to touch but not quite making contact, a violation that left no physical evidence. Which means it's mine. You stole from me, you pathetic little thief. The words echoed off the marble, amplified by the foyer's perfect acoustics. Aya felt something crack inside her chest, not quite breaking but fracturing under the sustained pressure. She wanted to scream, to shove Veronica backward, to demand the dignity that should have been her right. But she'd learned long ago that dignity was a luxury afforded to people who looked like Veronica, not people who looked like her. So she stood perfectly still, her jaw locked, her eyes fixed on some point past Veronica's shoulder. If she looked directly at her accuser, she might say something that would seal her fate. If she looked at the other staff members, she might see pity or judgment, and either would destroy what remained of her composure. Dae-Hyun. Veronica called toward the study, her voice shifting to a tone of wifely exasperation. Darling, I need you to authorize this. The staff needs to hear from you that we take theft seriously in this household. The manor seemed to hold its breath. Then Choi Dae-Hyun emerged from the study, and the temperature in the foyer dropped 10 degrees. He moved with the unhurried precision of a man who'd never needed to rush toward anything in his life. His black suit was impeccable, his posture military straight, his expression carved from stone. But it was the tablet in his hands that drew every eye in the room, the device he carried like a priest might carry scripture, with reverence and absolute authority. The assembled staff instinctively parted, creating a corridor between Choi and the confrontation. Min Seo actually stepped backward, as if proximity to his presence might burn. Young-ho bowed his head. Mrs. Park's shoulders tensed fractionally, the only sign of her unease. Veronica's performance faltered for just a moment, a microsecond of uncertainty crossing her face before her mask of outraged victimhood reasserted itself. Darling, thank God. This woman has stolen my grandmother's necklace, and she's refusing to. Choi raised his free hand, palm forward. The gesture was minimal, almost lazy, but Veronica's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence as if he'd physically silenced her. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier's electrical current and the distant whisper of wind against glass. Choi's dark eyes swept across the scene with the methodical precision of a surgeon assessing an operating theater. He looked at Veronica, at Mrs. Park, at the gathered staff, and finally, at Aya. Their gazes locked, and Aya saw something she hadn't expected. Not judgment, not anger, but cold, calculating assessment. He was reading her the way she imagined he read business rivals before destroying them. Measuring her truth against Veronica's theatrics with the precision of a man who'd built an empire on knowing when people lied. His thumb moved almost imperceptibly across the tablet screen. "Veronica," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume, "tell me exactly when you last saw the necklace." Veronica blinked, momentarily thrown by the question. She'd expected validation, not interrogation. "What?" "Darling, I already told you." "Tell me again." Choi's voice remained level, but something in its flatness made the hairs on Aya's neck stand on end. This wasn't a husband seeking clarification. This was a prosecutor establishing a timeline for a jury. 7 o'clock this morning, Veronica said, recovering her theatrical distress. "I checked on it during my meditation, like I always do. It was in its case in my dressing room, exactly where it should be." "And when did you discover it missing?" "Just before 10. When I went to choose my jewelry for the day." Veronica's hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture of loss. The case was there, but the necklace was gone. Vanished. Choi's expression didn't change. "Who accessed your chambers between 7 and 10? "She did." Veronica's fingers shot toward Aya again. "She was alone in my private rooms. Alone with my things." "What time?" The question was so procedural, so devoid of emotion, that Veronica faltered. Around 8, I think." 8:15? "You think, or you know?" 8:15, Veronica said firmly, her confidence rebuilding. "Mrs. Park can confirm. She sent the girl up with the linens." Mrs. Park nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir." 8:15 was her scheduled delivery. Choi's gaze shifted to Aya, and she felt the weight of it like physical pressure. "How long were you in Mrs. Choi's chambers?" Aya's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Less than 2 minutes, Mr. Choi. I placed the linens on the closet shelf and left." "Did you enter the dressing room?" "No, sir. The closet is in the bedroom itself. I never went further than that." "Did you see the jewelry case?" Aya hesitated, then chose truth over safety. "Yes, sir. It was visible on the dressing table through the doorway. But I didn't approach it or touch it." Veronica pounced on this admission like a hawk on a field mouse. "She admits she saw it. She saw my grandmother's necklace and couldn't resist." "Dae-Hyun, this is exactly what I've been telling you. We can't trust these people in our private spaces. They see beautiful things and their base nature takes over." The racist implication hung in the air, naked and ugly. Minasio's sharp intake of breath was audible. Young-ho's jaw tightened. Even Mrs. Park's professional mask cracked slightly, her eyes widening in shock at Veronica's boldness. But Choi's expression remained unchanged, as if his wife had commented on the weather rather than revealed the poisonous core of her worldview. His thumb continued its slow, deliberate movement across the tablet screen, and Aya realized he was navigating through something, menus, perhaps, or files. "You're certain she was the last person in your chambers before you discovered the theft?" Choi asked. "Absolutely certain." Veronica's voice rang with conviction. "No one else had access. The cleaning crew doesn't come until 11 on Tuesdays. The security staff doesn't enter the private floor. It was her, Dae-Hyun. Only her." "I see." Choi's finger tapped the tablet screen once, decisively. The device illuminated his face from below, casting shadows that made him look less like a husband and more like a judge pronouncing sentence. Veronica moved closer to him, lowering her voice to what she clearly believed was a private tone, though everyone in the foyer could hear every word. Darling, I know you value efficiency. So let's handle this efficiently. Have security search her room and her person. When they find nothing, because she's probably hidden it somewhere clever, we call the police and let them handle it. We can have her arrested and removed by evening, and I can hire a replacement by morning. She spoke about Aya's destruction with the casual ease of someone discussing household maintenance. The matter-of-factness of it was almost worse than the anger had been. Choi was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the tablet screen. The staff waited, frozen in their positions like figures in a tableau. Aya felt her future hanging by a thread, watching this man she barely knew decide whether to cut it. Then Choi looked up, and his gaze found Aya's across the foyer. Something passed between them, not sympathy, nothing so warm as that, but recognition. As if he saw something in her stillness, her refusal to break under pressure, that registered in whatever calculus he used to measure human worth. "Where were you?" he asked quietly, "between 7 and 8 this morning?" The question landed like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, and Aya grabbed it with both hands. "I was in the East Wing, sir. Polishing the silver in the formal dining room from 6:30 until 8. Mr. Kim can confirm, he brought me tea at 7:15. Mr. Kim nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. She was there. We discussed the menu for tonight's dinner while she worked." Aya felt something loosen fractionally in her chest, but she knew better than to let hope take root. One corroborating witness meant nothing against Veronica's accusation, not in this house, not with her face and Veronica's connections. She'd learned years ago that the truth was a fragile defense when wielded by the powerless against the powerful. Inside, she was screaming. The pressure built behind her ribs like steam in a sealed vessel, threatening to crack her composure into 1,000 jagged pieces. She wanted to shout that she'd worked herself raw for 3 weeks, that she'd endured Veronica's cruelty with dignity, that she'd never taken anything that wasn't freely given in her entire life. She wanted to demand why her word meant nothing, why her presence in this house was treated as evidence of criminal intent rather than honest labor. But she'd seen what happened to women who screamed their innocence in rooms full of people who'd already decided their guilt. She'd watched her mother plead with landlords, with employers, with police officers, and learned that desperation only confirmed their worst assumptions. Anger would be called aggression. Tears would be manipulation. Any emotion stronger than quiet deference would become proof of her unfitness for this rarefied world. So she stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her white apron, her spine straight despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She'd learned this posture young, the invisible armor of the perpetually accused. Make yourself small. Make yourself calm. Give them no excuse to escalate. But Choi was still watching her with those surgical eyes, and Aya realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that her silence might be its own confession in his calculus. That a man who dealt in violence and power might interpret stillness as guilt rather than self-preservation. The thought broke something loose inside her. If she was going to be destroyed, at least let it be while speaking truth. She lifted her chin and met Choi's gaze directly, abandoning the submissive posture she'd maintained for weeks. The movement felt like rebellion, like stepping off a cliff into empty air. His eyes narrowed fractionally, registering the shift. "Mr. Choi," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected, carrying across the marble foyer with unexpected force. "I didn't take Mrs. Choi's necklace. I have never stolen anything in my life. I understand that my word means very little here, that I'm new and replaceable and easy to blame. But I'm telling you the truth, and I'm asking you," she paused, choosing her next words with the care of someone selecting which weapon might save her life. "I'm asking you to verify it. However you need to. Search my room, search my belongings, check whatever records you keep. I have nothing to hide." It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a demand for justice, and she saw the moment Choi recognized the difference. Something flickered behind his impassive expression, not warmth, nothing so human, but a kind of cold respect for someone who refused to beg. Veronica's laugh shattered the moment. "Oh, this is precious. She's actually asking for an investigation, as if that will help her. Darling, she's obviously hidden it somewhere outside her room. These people aren't stupid, they know where to look first. These people. Aya repeated the words quietly, letting them hang in the air like the slur they were. She kept her eyes on Choi, not Veronica. Mr. Choi, I've worked in 7 households in Seoul. I can provide references from every one. I've never had a complaint, never had anything like this accusation. I came here because Mrs. Park said this was a house that valued excellence and discretion. I've tried to provide both. And yet my necklace is gone, Veronica interjected, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Choi's continued silence was clearly not the immediate validation she'd expected. Aya's hands trembled, but she kept them visible, nothing hidden. She thought of her mother's voice on their last phone call, "Baby, you keep your head high. Don't let them make you small." She wasn't small. She was terrified and trapped and standing on the edge of ruin, but she wasn't small. "I'm not asking for mercy, sir," she said to Choi. "I'm asking for truth. Whatever that costs." Choi's silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Then he lifted the tablet higher, angling it so the screen caught the chandelier's light. His thumb hovered over the glass surface with the deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing the first incision. "Truth," he repeated, his voice still that same flat, procedural tone. "An interesting request." Veronica shifted her weight, a minute movement that betrayed her first flicker of uncertainty. "Dae-Hyun, what are you doing? We don't need theatrics. Just authorize the search and I value efficiency, as you said." Choi's eyes never left the tablet screen. "So let me be efficient." The staff members exchanged glances. Mrs. Park's professional mask finally cracked, confusion replacing her careful neutrality. Min Seo had gone pale. Young-ho stood frozen, as if movement itself might trigger something catastrophic. Aya's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The tablet in Choi's hands suddenly represented something more than a business device. The way he held it, the way his thumb moved across its surface with practiced familiarity, this wasn't a man checking emails or reviewing contracts. This was a man who watched. The security system, Choi said, almost conversationally, was upgraded 6 months ago. State of the art. Italian company, German engineering, Korean installation. Every room, every corridor, every entrance. All feeding to a central server that I personally monitor. Veronica's face went perfectly still, all theatrical distress evaporating into something harder and more dangerous. "Darling, the private chambers are supposed to be private from the staff, yes. Not from me." His thumb tapped the screen once. "Never from me." The implication detonated silently in the foyer. Aya saw understanding ripple across the assembled faces, Mrs. Park's eyes widening, Mr. Kim's sharp intake of breath, Min Seo's hand flying to her mouth. They'd all believed the private floors were beyond surveillance, personal sanctuaries even from Choi's reach. They'd been wrong. "You're not serious," Veronica said, but her voice had lost its certainty, replaced by something that might have been panic masquerading as indignation. "You wouldn't actually record our private." "I record everything." Choi interrupted, his tone suggesting he was stating a simple fact rather than making a revelation. "Security isn't selective, Veronica. It's comprehensive or it's worthless." His thumb moved again, navigating through what Aya now understood was surveillance footage. She watched Veronica's face transform in microseconds, theatrical outrage collapsing into genuine fear, then reassembling itself into a fragile mask of wifely concern. "Then you'll see I'm right," Veronica said quickly, too quickly. "You'll see her enter my chambers and I've already seen it." Choi's words fell like a guillotine blade. "I reviewed the footage while you were making your accusations. I wanted to understand what happened before I made any decisions." The foyer's silence became absolute, the kind of quiet that precedes executions or earthquakes. Aya couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the single terrible hope that maybe, impossibly, this man with his tablet and his cold eyes had seen something that would save her. Choi turned the tablet around, angling it so the gathered staff could see the screen. His thumb hovered over the play button, and Aya saw Veronica's reflection in the chandelier crystals, her face gone white beneath expensive makeup, her perfectly composed expression fracturing at the edges. "Would you like to revise your statement?" Choi asked his wife, "before I show them what I found?" It wasn't a question. It was a last chance, offered with the same clinical detachment a judge might offer a defendant before pronouncing sentence. Veronica's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her eyes darted between Choi's face and the tablet, calculating odds, measuring potential damage. Aya saw the exact moment she decided to double down rather than retreat. "I don't need to revise anything," Veronica said, but her voice trembled. "Whatever that footage shows, it will prove she took my necklace. Show them, Dae-Hyun. Show them all." The challenge hung in the air, desperate and defiant. Choi's thumb pressed down. The tablet screen flickered to life, and the truth began to play. The footage was soundless, but its clarity was surgical. The timestamp read 7:23 a.m., and the camera angle showed Veronica's dressing room from above, capturing every detail in high-definition precision. Veronica Choi entered the frame wearing a silk robe, her hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. She moved directly to the jewelry case on her vanity, the ornate rosewood box that supposedly held her grandmother's emerald necklace. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, the behavior of someone alone and unwatched. Or so she believed. She opened the case with a small key, revealing the necklace inside. Even on the tablet screen, the emeralds gleamed with unmistakable authenticity. Veronica lifted it carefully, examining it in the morning light streaming through the window. Then, instead of returning it to the case, she glanced toward the doorway. The gesture was quick, furtive. Checking for witnesses. Satisfied she was alone, Veronica crossed to her dressing table and pulled open what appeared to be a decorative drawer. But her fingers pressed something hidden, and a false bottom released with silent precision. A hidden compartment, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She placed the necklace inside, tucking it carefully beneath what looked like old letters or documents. Then she closed the compartment with a soft click, the drawer sliding back into place as if nothing had been disturbed. And then, worst of all, she smiled. It was a small smile, satisfied and malicious, the expression of someone who just set a trap and was already savoring its inevitable spring. She checked her reflection in the mirror, adjusted her robe, and walked out of frame. The timestamp continued, 7:24 a.m. 7 minutes before she would claim to have last seen the necklace safely in its case. The foyer remained frozen in horrified silence. No one moved. No one seemed to breathe. Minasio's hand was still pressed against her mouth. Mr. Kim's weathered face showed open shock. Mrs. Park's professional composure had shattered completely, her eyes wide with the terrible understanding of what this meant. Aya felt something break loose in her chest, not relief, not yet, but the first desperate gasp of someone who'd been drowning and suddenly found air. Veronica made a strangled sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. That's edited. He manipulated the footage. Dae-Hyun, you can't possibly. Choi's thumb moved again, cutting to a different camera angle. New timestamp, 8:15 a.m. This footage showed the bedroom from a different perspective. The door opened, and Aya entered carrying a stack of pristine white linens. She moved quickly, efficiently, crossing directly to the closet. She opened it, placed the linens on the designated shelf with care, closed the door, and turned to leave. Her movements were visible for exactly 93 seconds. She never approached the dressing table. Never entered the dressing room. Never even glanced at the jewelry case that sat in plain view through the doorway. She left, closing the bedroom door behind her. The timestamp continued running, 8:17 a.m. More than an hour before Veronica would discover the theft. Choi swiped to a third piece of footage. 9:47 a.m. Veronica entering her chambers, moving directly to the jewelry case, opening it dramatically, and immediately screaming for the staff. Her performance was textbook, the shock, the distress, the immediate pivot to accusation. She'd even knocked over a perfume bottle for added chaos, a detail that would have seemed like genuine panic to anyone who hadn't watched her carefully stage the entire scene. Enough, Veronica whispered, but Choi let the footage continue playing, documenting every calculated gesture, every fraudulent moment of her manufactured crisis. The silence in the foyer had transformed into something almost physical, a pressure that made breathing difficult. Aya watched emotions flicker across the staff's faces, shock melting into understanding hardening into anger at the cruelty they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Park found her voice first, and it emerged cold with professional disgust. Mrs. Choi orchestrated this entire situation. She wanted the girl fired, Mr. Kim said flatly. Or worse. Veronica's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time across her face. The theatrical victim dissolved, replaced by something cornered and desperate. She turned to her husband, reaching for his arm. Dae-Hyun, please, you don't understand. He stepped back, removing himself from her reach with the finality of a door closing. Veronica's composure shattered like fine porcelain dropped on marble. It was a test, she said, her voice rising toward hysteria. I was testing the staff's loyalty, their honesty. You always say we need to know who we can trust, and You framed an innocent woman for theft. Choi's voice remained that same flat, procedural tone, which somehow made the condemnation more devastating than any shouting could have achieved. You manufactured evidence. You lied to my face. You wasted my time. The final accusation landed with particular weight. In Choi Dae-Hyun's hierarchy of sins, Aya was beginning to understand, dishonesty and inefficiency ranked somewhere below murder but above most other transgressions. I didn't think you'd actually check the cameras, Veronica whispered, and the admission hung in the air like a confession extracted under torture. The private floors are supposed to be. Nothing is private from me in this house. Choi set the tablet down on the foyer console table with deliberate care, the gesture somehow more threatening than if he'd thrown it. I thought you understood that after 5 years of marriage. Apparently, I was wrong. Veronica's eyes filled with tears, genuine ones this time, born of fear rather than performance. Dae-Hyun, please. I made a mistake. I'll apologize to the girl, I'll make it right. Her name is Aya Johnson. Each word came out precise as a scalpel cut. And you won't be apologizing to her because you won't be speaking to her at all. He turned to address Mrs. Park, his posture shifting into what Aya recognized as command mode. Mrs. Choi will be confined to the West Wing until further notice. All staff are to deny her access to their personal spaces, the kitchen, and the main house. Meals will be delivered to her rooms. No visitors. No phone calls without my explicit approval. Mrs. Park nodded, her face still showing traces of shock but her professionalism reasserting itself. Yes, sir. For how long? Until I decide otherwise. Choi's gaze shifted back to Veronica, and something in his expression made even Aya, innocent and vindicated, feel a chill. You wanted to demonstrate power over the staff. Instead, you've demonstrated that you can't be trusted with the authority this household requires. Consider this a lesson in consequences. Veronica opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. You can't be serious. I'm your wife. You can't just imprison me in my own home like some criminal? Choi's eyebrow rose fractionally. You attempted to have an innocent woman arrested for a crime you fabricated. What would you call that? The question required no answer. Veronica seemed to understand that further protest would only deepen her predicament. She gathered the shreds of her dignity, considerable shreds, given years of practice, and turned toward the staircase. Her emerald Dior gown, chosen that morning to match the necklace she'd hidden, now seemed like evidence of premeditation. She paused at the base of the stairs, looking back at Choi with something that might have been hope or calculation. How long will you punish me? That depends entirely on how well you learn. His tone suggested he had little faith in her educational prospects. Veronica climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, until she disappeared into the shadows of the upper gallery. The assembled staff watched her go with expressions ranging from satisfaction to pity to carefully neutral professionalism. Then Choi turned, and his gaze found Aya across the foyer. She felt her breath catch. This was the moment that would define her future here, whether she'd remain merely vindicated or become something else entirely in this strange household's hierarchy. Aya Johnson. His voice carried no warmth, but it carried something else, recognition. You are cleared of all accusations. The matter is closed. Thank you, Mr. Choi. Her voice emerged steady despite the trembling in her legs. Resume your duties. He paused, and his next words seemed chosen with unusual care. Your composure under false accusation was noted. In this house, dignity under pressure is a rare quality. One I value. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even quite praise. But from a man like Choi Dae-Hyun, it was acknowledgement of her worth, not as a servant who'd been wrongly accused, but as someone who'd proven herself capable of withstanding forces that would have broken lesser people. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Aya saw something flicker in his expression, not affection, nothing so simple, but a kind of cold respect. She'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Yes, sir, she said quietly. He picked up the tablet, turned, and walked back toward his study, leaving the staff to process what they'd witnessed. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. Morning light filtered through the manor's windows with the same crystalline clarity as always, but everything had changed. Aya polished the foyer mirror, the same task she'd been performing when Veronica's accusations had detonated her world, and felt the weight of eyes on her back. Not hostile eyes. Not anymore. Minessio passed through carrying fresh flowers, and her bow was deeper than protocol required. Good morning, ISSI, she said, using the respectful honorific she'd never employed before. The formality carried something beyond mere politeness. It carried fear, or perhaps recognition that Aya had survived something that would have destroyed others. Young-ho appeared at the service entrance with the morning deliveries, and he nodded to her with careful deference. The garden chrysanthemums are ready if you need them for the East Wing arrangements. Even Mrs. Park, whose professional neutrality had been legendary, treated Aya with new consideration. Take your lunch break at noon today, she'd said that morning, not the usual 11:30 that marked junior staff. You've earned the flexibility. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Aya had entered the manor 3 weeks ago as the newest, most disposable member of the household. She'd survived yesterday as something else entirely, someone who'd faced Veronica Choi's malice and emerged not just vindicated, but protected by the one authority in this house that superseded all others. The West Wing remained silent, its curtains drawn. Veronica hadn't emerged since her confinement, and whispered conversations among the staff suggested she wouldn't for some time. The emerald necklace had been retrieved from its hiding place by Choi himself, witnessed by Mrs. Park to ensure no questions remained. It now sat in Choi's personal safe, removed from Veronica's access entirely, a small humiliation that carried enormous symbolic weight. Aya finished the mirror and moved to the console table, the same surface where Choi had placed his tablet like a judge laying down a gavel. She ran her cloth across the polished wood, remembering how the device had glowed in his hands, how his thumb had moved with surgical precision through footage that had saved her life. A small sound made her look up. Through the open study door, she caught a glimpse of Choi at his desk, the tablet propped on its stand before him. Multiple windows divided the screen, camera feeds from throughout the manor, she realized. The foyer where she stood. The kitchen where Mr. Kim prepared lunch. The gardens where Young-ho trimmed hedges. The West Wing where Veronica remained imprisoned by her husband's judgment. And as Aya watched, Choi's gaze lifted from his work and found the camera that monitored the foyer. Found her, through the digital medium that had proven her innocence. Their eyes didn't meet, he was looking at a screen, she at a doorway, but the connection was there nonetheless. A silent acknowledgement that passed between them like a contract signed in invisible ink. She bowed, a gesture of respect that felt different from the reflexive deference she'd shown for weeks. This bow carried understanding. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition of what his protection meant in this house, what it cost and what it demanded. Choi's head inclined fractionally in response. Then his attention returned to his work, and Aya understood the exchange was complete. She resumed her polishing, but her movements carried a different quality now. Not the desperate efficiency of someone trying to remain invisible, but the confident precision of someone who'd earned her place through fire. The manor's other staff gave her wide berth as they passed, and Aya understood why. She'd become something dangerous in their eyes, not a threat, exactly, but someone who existed under Choi's direct notice. Someone who'd proven herself capable of surviving his wife's cruelty and worthy of his strange, absolute form of justice. In the study, the tablet's screen continued its silent vigil, multiple camera feeds updating in real time. The technology was impersonal, clinical, comprehensive, exactly like the man who monitored it. Choi Dae-Hyun watched everything, judged everything, and his verdicts, once delivered, were immutable as gravity. Veronica had learned this yesterday. The staff had learned it too, watching their mistress's power evaporate under the cold scrutiny of documented truth. And Aya had learned something different, that in this gilded cage where beauty masked danger and cruelty hid behind wealth, there existed one absolute authority. Choi's justice was merciless and precise, yes, but it was also strangely fair, at least to those who valued truth over theater, dignity over manipulation. She'd come to this manor desperate and disposable. She'd survived it through stillness and honesty. And now she remained, transformed from victim to something she didn't quite have a name for yet. Protected. Noticed. Marked by survival. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the foyer's crystal chandeliers. Aya finished her polishing and moved to her next task, carrying with her the knowledge that in this house of secrets and surveillance, she'd become someone worth watching. Not with suspicion, but with a cold respect that was perhaps more valuable than any warmth could ever be. The tablet in Choi's study continued its endless observation, and Aya Johnson worked beneath its unblinking gaze, no longer afraid of what it might see. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.